10.1 Externalities. An externality is a cost or a benefit that arises from production and that falls on someone other than the producer, or a cost or a benefit that arises from consumption and that falls on someone other than the consumer. First, an externality can arise from either a production activity or consumption activity. Second, it can be either a negative externality which imposes an external cost or a positive externality which provides an external benefit. So there are four types of externalities: negative production externalities, positive production externalities, negative consumption externalities, positive consumption externalities. Negative production externalities. Burning coal to generate electricity emits carbon dioxide that warms the planet and other chemicals that pollute the atmosphere. Logging and the cleaning of forests destroyed the habitat of wildlife and also influenced the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These activities are major examples of production that brings negative externalities. The cost of these production activities are borne by everyone and even by future generations. Noise is another negative production externality. When the US Open tennis tournament is being played at Flushing Meadows, players, spectators, and television viewers around the world share costs that many New Yorkers experience every day. The noise of aeroplanes taking off from LaGuardia Airport. Airport noise imposes a large cost on millions of people who live under the flight paths to airports in every major city. Positive production externalities. To produce orange blossom honey, Honey Honey of Chico, California locates beehives next to an orange orchard. The honeybees collect pollen and nectar from the orange blossom to make the honey. At the same time, they transfer pollen between the blossoms, which helps to fertilize the blossoms. Two positive production externalities are present in this example. Honey gets a positive production externality from the owner of the orange orchard, and the orange grower positive production externality from Honey Run. Negative consumption externalities. Negative consumption externalities are a source of irritation for most of us. Smoking tobacco in a confined space creates fumes that many people find unpleasant and that pose a health risk. So, smoking in restaurants or on airplanes generates a negative externality. To avoid this negative externality, many restaurants and all airlines ban smoking. But while a smoking ban avoids a negative consumption, who would prefer to enjoy the consumption of tobacco while dining or taking a plane trip? Noisy parties and outdoor rock concerts are other examples of negative consumption externalities. They are also examples of the fact that a simple ban on an activity is not a solution. Banning noisy parties avoids the external cost on the fun-seeking partygoers. Permitting dandelions to grow in lawns, not picking up leaves in the fall, allowing a dog bark loudly or to foul a neighbor's lawn, and letting a cell phone ring in class are all other examples of negative consumption externalities. Positive consumption externalities. When you get a flu vaccination, you lower your risk of being infected. If you avoid the flu, your neighbor who didn't get vaccinated has a better chance of remaining healthy. Flu vaccination generate positive consumption externalities. When the owner of the historic building restores it, everyone who sees the building gets pleasure from it. Similarly, when someone erects a spectacular home such as those built by Frank Lloyd Wright during the 1920s and 1930s, or other exciting buildings such as Chrysler and Empire State Buildings in New York or a Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, an external consumption benefit flows to everyone who has an opportunity to view it. Education, which we examine in more detail in this chapter, is a major example of this type of externality. Negative externalities, that is pollution. Pollution is an example of negative externality. Both production and consumption activities create pollution. Here we will focus on pollution as a negative production externality. When a paint factory dumps waste into a river, the people who live by the river and use it for fishing and boating bear the cost of pollution. The paint factory does not consider the cost of pollution when it decides the quantity of paint to produce. The factory's supply curve is based on its own cost, not on the cost that it inflicts on others. So we are going to see that when external costs are present, we produce more output than the efficient quantity and we get more pollution than the efficient quantity. Pollution and other environmental problems are not new. Pre-industrial towns and cities in Europe had severe sewage disposal problems that created cholera epidemics and plagues that killed millions. Nor is the desire to find solutions to environmental problems new. Popular discussions about pollution focus on physical aspects of the environment, not on cost and benefits. A common assumption is that activities that damage the environment are wrong and must cease. The starting point for an economic analysis of the environment is a distinction between private cost and social costs. Private cost and social costs. A private cost of production is a cost that is borne by producer of a good or service. Marginal cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of the good or service. Therefore, marginal private cost, that is MC, is the cost of producing an additional unit of the good or service that is borne by the producer of that good or service. An external cost is a cost of producing a good or service that is not borne by the producer but borne by the people. Marginal social cost, that is MSC, is a marginal cost incurred by the entire society, by the producer, and by everyone else on whom the cost falls, and is the sum of marginal private cost and the marginal external cost. That is, MSC is equal to MC plus marginal external cost. We express cost in dollars, but we must always remember that a cost is opportunity cost, the best thing we give up to get something. A marginal external cost is what someone other than the producer of a good or service must give up when the producer makes one more unit of the item. Something real that people value, such as clean water or clean air, is given up. Valuing an external cost. Economists use market prices to put a dollar value on the cost of pollution. For example, suppose that there are two similar rivers, one polluted and other clean, with identical homes along the sides of each river. The homes on the clean river rent for $1,000 a month more than those on the polluted river. If pollution is the only detectable difference between the two locations, the $1,000 a month rent difference is the social cost per home of the pollution. The 1,000 multiplied by the number of homes on the polluted river is the total external cost of this pollution. External cost and output. Figure shows an example of the relation between the output and cost in a polluting industry. The marginal cost curve MC describes the private marginal cost borne by the firm that produces the paint. Marginal cost increases as the quantity of paint produced increases. If the firm dumps waste into the river, they impose an external cost that increases with the amount of the paint produced. The marginal cost curve MSC is the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost. For example, when firm produce 4 million gallons of paint a month, marginal private cost is $1 a gallon, marginal external cost is $1.25 a gallon, and marginal social cost is $2.25 a gallon. In figure, as the quantity of the paint produced increases, the amount of pollution increases and the external cost of pollution increases. The quantity of the paint produced and the pollution created depend on how the market for the paint operates. The MC curve in the figure shows the marginal private cost borne by the factories that produce paint. The MSC curve costs the marginal external cost. Shows the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost. When the quantity of paint produced is 4 million a gallon a month, marginal private cost is $1 a gallon, marginal external cost is $1.25 a gallon, and marginal social cost is $2.25 a gallon. Production and pollution, how much? When a polluting industry is unregulated, the market outcome is one of inefficient overproduction. In the pursuit of their self-interest, firms produce too much and they pollute too much. Figure illustrates a market for paint in which producers pollute and create deadweight loss. In the figure, the demand curve and marginal benefit curve for paint is D is equal to MB. The supply curve and marginal private cost curve of producers of the paint is S is equal to MC. The supply curve is the marginal private cost curve because when firms make supply decisions, they pursue their self-interest and consider only the cost that they bear. The market equilibrium occurs where marginal benefit equals marginal private cost. The price is $1 a gallon and the quantity is 4 million gallons a month. This output is inefficient because marginal social cost exceeds the marginal benefit. The efficient outcome is when marginal benefit equals marginal social cost. The figure efficient quantity of the paint is 2 million gallons a month, where marginal social cost and marginal benefit is each equal $1.50 per gallon. The equilibrium output is one of inefficient overproduction, and the gray triangle shows the deadweight loss that arises in this situation. Three methods are available to curb this inefficiency of firms with an external cost. Establish property rights, mandate clean technology, tax or price pollution. The first one, establish property rights. Property rights are legally established titles to the ownership, use, and disposal of factors of production and goods and services that are enforceable in the courts. Establishing property rights where they do not currently exist can confront producers with the cost of their actions and provide them with an incentive to allocate resources efficiently. To see how property rights work, suppose that the paint producer have property rights on a river and homes alongside it. They own the river and the homes. The rental income that the paint producer earn in the homes depend on the amount of pollution they create. If people are willing to pay $1,000 a month more to live alongside a pollution-free river, the paint producers can earn that amount for each of the homes they own by not polluting the river. The foregone rental income from homes alongside a polluted river is an opportunity cost of producing paint. It is part of the paint producer's marginal private cost, and the paint producers must now decide how to respond to this cost. These are two things they might do: use an abatement technology, produce less and pollute less. Use of abatement technology is a production technology that reduces or prevents pollution. The catalyst converter in every US car is an example of an abatement technology. Its widespread adoption, along with lead-free gasoline, has dramatically reduced pollution from highway vehicles and helped to achieve the trends in US air quality. Abatement technologies are available to reduce carbon emissions from electricity generation and pollution from industrial processes and paint manufacture. Second is produce less and pollute less. An alternative to incurring the cost if using an abatement technology is to use the polluting technology but cut production, reduce pollution, and get a higher income from renting homes by the river. Firms will choose the least cost alternative method of lowering pollution. The Coase theorem. The Coase theorem, named for British economist Ronald Coase, who was the first to have this remarkable insight, says it doesn't matter whether the polluter or the victim of the pollution owns the resource that might be polluted. The Coase theorem is a proposition that if private rights exist and the cost of enforcing them are low, then the market outcome is efficient and it doesn't matter who has the property rights. Application of Coase theorem. Suppose that the residents own their homes and the river. Now the factories must pay free to the homeowners for the right to dump waste into the river. The greater the quantity of waste dumped, the more the factories must pay. So again, the factories face the opportunity cost, the pollution they create as part of their marginal private cost. The quantity of paint produced and the amount of waste dumped are the same whoever owns the homes and the river. If factories own them, they bear the cost of pollution because they receive a lower income from home rents. If the residents own the homes and the river, the factories bear the cost of pollution because they must pay a fee to the homeowners. In both cases, the factories bear the cost of their pollution and dump the efficient amount of waste into the river. Efficient market equilibrium with property rights. Figure illustrates the efficient market outcome with property rights in place. The paint producers face the pollution cost or the abatement cost, whichever is lower. The MSE curve includes the cost of producing paint plus either the cost of abatement or the cost of pollution, that is foregone rent, whichever is lower. This curve labeled S is equal to MC is equal to MSC is now the market supply curve. Market equilibrium occurs at a price of $1.50 per gallon and 2 million gallons per paint per month. This outcome is efficient. If the foregone rent is less than the abatement cost, the factories will create some pollution, but it will be efficient quantity. If the abatement cost is lower than the foregone rent, the factories will stop polluting, but they will produce less paint because marginal cost includes the abatement cost. The coarse property rights solution works only when the cost of reaching an agreement between property owners is low. In many situations, these negotiation costs are high, so this solution is not available and the government action is needed. One such action is to mandate the use of the clean abatement technology. Mandate clean technology. The government of most countries regulate what may be dumped in rivers and lakes and emitted into the atmosphere. Environment resources of the United States are heavily regulated by the federal and state governments. The most comprehensive environmental regulation is performed under the provisions of the Clean Air Act of 1970 and its later amendments, which gives the Environmental Protection Agency (EPA) the authority to issue regulations that limit emissions and achieve defined air quality standards. The EPA has issued thousands of regulations that require chemical plants, utilities, and steel mills to adopt best practice pollution abatement technologies and limit their emissions of specified air pollutants. Other regulations have been issued that govern road vehicle emission limits, which must be by vehicle manufacturers. But a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States is electric power utilities that use coal, and a deep controversy surrounds the question of whether the Clean Air Act extends to regulating these utilities. The legal battle turns on the question of whether carbon dioxide is a pollutant. The Supreme Court ruled in 2007 that carbon emissions are a pollutant, a ruling that requires the EPA to regulate these utilities because these issues is so deeply divisive. The EPA has stood on the sidelines. Although direct regulation can and has reduced emissions and improved air quality, economists are generally skeptical about this approach. Abatement is not always the least cost solution. Also, government agencies are not well placed to find the cost minimizing solution to a pollution problem. Individual firms seeking to minimize cost and maximize profit and responding to private price signals more likely to achieve an efficient outcome. Tax or cap and price pollution. Government use two main methods of confronting polluters with the cost of their decisions. One is taxes, the second is cap and trade. Taxes. Government can use taxes as an incentive for producers to reduce the pollution they create. Taxes used in this way are called Pigouvian taxes, named for Arthur Cecil Pigou, the British economist who first worked out this method of dealing with external costs during the 1920s. By setting the tax equal to the marginal external cost, that is marginal abatement cost if it is lower, firms can be made to behave in the same way as they would if they bore the cost of the externality directly. To see how government actions can change the outcome in the market with external cost, let's return to the example of paint factories and the river. Assume that the government has accessed the marginal external cost of pollution accurately and imposes a tax on the factories that exactly equals this cost. The producers are now confronted with the social cost of their actions. The market equilibrium is one in which price equals marginal social cost, an efficient outcome. Figure illustrate the curve MC is the marginal private cost of producing paint. The tax equals marginal external cost of pollution. We add this tax to the marginal private cost to find the market supply curve, the curve labeled S is equal to MC plus tax. This curve is the market supply curve because it tells the quantity of paint supplied at each price given the factory's marginal cost and tax they must pay. This curve is also marginal social cost curve MSC because the pollution tax has been set equal to the marginal external cost at the quantity produced. Demand and supply now determine the market equilibrium price at $1.50 per gallon, $1.50 per gallon, and 2 million gallons of paint a month. At this quantity of paint produced, the marginal social cost is $1.50 and marginal benefit is $1.50, so the market outcome is efficient. The factories incur a marginal private cost of 90 cents per gallon and pay pollution tax of 60 cents per gallon. The government collects tax revenue of $1.2 million per month, which is shown by the gray area in the figure. Cap and trade. Cap and trade places a cap or ceiling on emissions and assigns and sells emission rights to individual producers who are then free to trade permits with each other. It is a tool that seeks to combine the power of government to limit total emissions with the power of the market to minimize cost and maximize benefit. A government that uses this method must first estimate the efficient quantity of pollution and set the overall cap to achieve the efficient outcome. Then the government must somehow allocate shares of the cap to individual firms and possibly even households. In an efficient allocation of emissions quotas to firms, each firm has the same marginal social cost of production and emissions abatement. So, to allocate the cap efficiently across firms, the government would need to know a lot about each firm's production and abatement costs. A Pigouvian tax achieves an efficient allocation of pollution across firms because each firm chooses how much to produce and pollute, taking the tax into account, and then produces the quantity at which marginal social cost equals price. Because all firms face the same market price, they also incur the same marginal social cost. The government solves the allocation problem by making an initial distribution of the cap across firms and then allowing them to trade in a market for emission permits. Firms that have a low marginal abatement cost sell permits and make big cuts in pollution. Firms that have a high marginal abatement cost buy permits and make smaller cuts or perhaps even no cuts in pollution. The market in permits determines the equilibrium price of emissions, and each firm confronted with that price maximized profit by setting its marginal pollution cost or marginal abatement cost, whichever is lower, equal to the market price of a permit. By confronting polluters with the price of pollution, trade in pollution of a permits can achieve the same efficient outcome as a Pigouvian tax.